Amara had always been a bright spark in the otherwise quiet village, her laughter ringing like silver bells through the narrow lanes and open fields. She moved with a grace and curiosity that drew people's admiration, and her small hands seemed capable of turning the simplest moments into magic. Her father adored her, though he was often distracted by matters of trade and village affairs, leaving Amara to navigate the household largely on her own. This was when Zola, her stepmother, saw her opportunity. Zola was a woman of sharp eyes and sharper tongue, envious of the girl's beauty, her cleverness, and the gentle warmth that drew attention wherever she went. She had long tolerated Amara's presence, but the more the village celebrated the girl's spirit, the more a simmering bitterness took root in her heart, twisting into cruel determination. One evening, when the wind whispered through the eaves and the sun had dipped behind the distant mountains, Zola approached Amara with a sweet, false smile, speaking softly of danger in the village, of shadows that lingered after sunset, and of misfortunes that might befall the innocent. "It is for your own safety, my child," she said, though her words dripped with something heavier, something that pressed on Amara's chest without her realizing it. The girl's eyes, wide with trust, followed her stepmother as she led her up the narrow staircase that creaked with every careful step. The attic door loomed before them, a dark portal of forgotten things and lingering dust, its wood scarred and weathered by years of neglect. Zola's hands were firm on Amara's shoulders as she guided her into the shadowed space. "Stay here until I return," she said, her voice curling with feigned concern, before turning away and leaving the door locked behind her. Amara's small frame trembled in the darkness, her heart beating like a drum in her chest. She pressed her fingers against the cold walls, listening to the distant sounds of the household below, the clatter of dishes, the soft murmur of voices, the low creak of her father's chair. The attic smelled of dust and old wood, a scent thick with memories of years that no longer lived, and it was both frightening and strangely comforting, a reminder that the space had once been occupied, loved, and abandoned in equal measure. Her eyes, adjusting to the dim, flickered across the room, taking in piles of forgotten belongings, moth-eaten cloth, and trunks with tarnished brass handles, some cracked and gaping like ancient mouths whispering secrets. She stepped forward cautiously, each footfall stirring small clouds of gray dust that floated lazily in the stale air. As Amara explored, she began to uncover remnants of lives once lived. A bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, brittle and yellowed, revealed scraps of hope and sorrow from a family long gone. Old heirlooms lay scattered, a tiny carved box with delicate patterns, a pair of worn slippers, a locket containing a photograph of someone she could not name, but whose gaze seemed kind and approving. Her curiosity, stronger than her fear, drew her toward a small, cracked mirror tucked into a corner. Its surface was mottled and scratched, yet as she peered into it, she felt something extraordinary. It did not merely reflect her wide, frightened eyes or the trembling line of her lips. It seemed to reflect her dreams, her hidden thoughts, and the possibilities of a life not yet lived. The glass shimmered faintly in the attic gloom, showing a world where her courage and spirit could grow despite confinement. Alone in the dim light, Amara felt the first stirrings of determination. Though she was trapped by her stepmother's cruelty, she sensed that the attic was not just a prison, it was a place of discovery. Each object whispered fragments of stories long forgotten, and each shadow seemed to hold the promise of imagination and resilience. The fear that had gripped her heart softened into curiosity, and she began to see the space as a realm where her mind and spirit could roam free, even if her body was confined. She traced her fingers along the dusty surfaces, letting the textures tell their tales, letting the old mirror hint at a life she could shape with patience and courage, understanding that the world might be cruel, but within these four walls she could find a spark that no darkness could extinguish. Amara sat huddled on the wooden floor of the attic, her knees drawn close to her chest, listening to the silence that pressed against the walls. Yet the silence was not complete. From the corners where shadows pooled thickly, she began to hear something, soft, almost imperceptible at first, a gentle murmur that seemed to rise and fall with the creaking of the roof. At first, she thought it was the wind threading through cracks in the old wood or perhaps the size of the house settling after years of neglect. But the sound persisted, weaving itself into patterns, melodic and tender, like a lullaby sung to someone far away. Her wide eyes scanned the darkness, searching for the source, but all she saw were the familiar outlines of trunks, boxes, and her own shadow stretching across the dusty boards. Her heart fluttered uneasily. "Am I imagining this?" she whispered to herself, her voice small and trembling. Yet the whispers continued, more distinct now, curling around her ears and beckoning her gaze upward. She noticed a faint silver gleam streaming through a tiny opening in the roof, a shard of moonlight cutting through the darkness like a sliver of hope. It was as if the moon itself had chosen this moment, slipping past the eaves to peer down at her, bathing the attic floor in a delicate glow. The light danced along the trunks and the scattered remnants of forgotten lives, turning dust motes into shimmering stars that floated lazily in the air. The sight calmed Amara's racing heart. She felt as though the moonlight was a companion, silently acknowledging her presence and her fear. She lifted her trembling hands, letting the silver touch her fingertips, and spoke softly, pouring her thoughts into the quiet night. "I am afraid," she said, her voice barely audible, "and I am lonely and I do not know why I am here." She hesitated, then added, "But I hope there is something good beyond these walls. I hope I can be brave." As if in answer, the moonlight seemed to pulse gently, brightening in rhythm with her words, and patterns began to emerge on the dusty floor. Tiny silver shapes shimmered, a delicate flower unfurling, a small bird stretching its wings, a winding river carving its path. Amara's eyes widened with awe. The simple forms seemed alive, moving subtly as if breathing in response to her thoughts. Her fear ebbed, replaced by a warmth that filled the small, dim attic. She felt seen, acknowledged, and in a way, understood by the luminous presence above her. Night after night, the whispers continued, growing bolder and clearer, guiding Amara's gaze toward the moon's silver light. She spoke to it freely, sharing secrets she had never told anyone, her longing for freedom, her sadness at her stepmother's cruelty, and the dreams she held close to her heart. And each night, the moonlight rewarded her courage with gentle illumination, forming new shapes that danced and swirled across the floor, offering companionship and comfort. The attic, once a place of fear and isolation, became a realm where her spirit could wander, where the moon's whispers encouraged her to trust in the unseen and find solace even in confinement. In that glow, Amara discovered the first. That night, Amara lay on the wooden floor of the attic, wrapped in the thin blanket she had managed to drag from her bed, feeling the weight of silence pressing against her. The house below had grown quiet, even the soft creak of her father's chair was gone, and the wind had stilled outside, leaving the attic in stillness so deep that her heartbeat sounded loud in her ears. She stared at the narrow beam of moonlight that had slipped through the attic roof, the same silver thread that had comforted her before, and for the first time she noticed something extraordinary. Within the pale glow, there appeared a faint figure, a luminous companion that seemed to shimmer and pulse softly, almost as if it breathed alongside her. Every subtle movement she made was mirrored in the shifting light, a gentle reflection of her posture, her gestures, even her hesitant expressions. The figure was not solid, yet it held a presence that felt undeniably alive, protective, and attuned to her very soul. Amara's eyes widened in awe, her fears slowly dissolving into wonder. She reached a tentative hand toward the radiant shape, and the light shimmered, drawing back just enough to maintain its mystery, yet close enough to offer comfort. She whispered softly, almost shyly, "Hello, are you here for me?" The light pulsed in response, subtle yet perceptible, as though acknowledging her greeting. Emboldened, she began to talk, sharing her stories aloud. She told the luminous figure about her mother, who had passed when she was very young, leaving behind memories wrapped in lullabies and warmth. She spoke of her father, distracted and loving in his own imperfect way, and of Zola, the stepmother whose envy had led to her confinement. Her voice trembled at times, thick with sadness and longing, but the moonlit figure seemed to listen intently, patient and gentle. Encouraged, Amara began recounting her hopes for the future, the freedom she longed for, the friends she wished she could play with, and the adventures she dreamed of beyond the narrow attic walls. As she spoke, the light responded subtly, forming soft silhouettes that danced across the dusty floor. She saw the delicate outline of a bird stretching its wings, then a tiny flower unfurling in the corner, followed by a winding river that seemed to shimmer and curve as if alive. Stars twinkled faintly within the glow, casting silver patterns over the old trunks and scattered belongings. Each form mirrored her words, almost as if the moonlight was not merely reflecting her movements but interpreting her thoughts and emotions, cheering her silently in ways she could feel but not fully articulate. The attic, once a place of fear, had transformed into a sanctuary where imagination and reality intertwined, where loneliness was replaced by companionship and understanding. Night after night, Amara returned to this ritual, finding courage in the glow, joy in the silent forms, and freedom in a space that existed beyond the stepmother's cruelty. She began to speak with more confidence, telling longer stories, painting vivid pictures with her words and the subtle responses of the moonlight. The luminous companion seemed to grow in presence with every evening, its glow stronger, its forms more intricate, creating animals, stars, and flowers that moved across the floor as if alive, celebrating her resilience. For the first time, Amara felt the pure delight of having a friend who could see her heart and nurture it without judgment. In the glow of her celestial companion, she discovered a world where her spirit could soar beyond confinement, where hope could flourish, and where the bond between a girl and the moonlight became a source of unwavering courage, warmth, and wonder that would sustain her through every dark night ahead. Zola had always been watchful, her sharp eyes scanning every corner of the household, noting every small detail of Amara's movements and moods. At first, she expected the girl to appear frightened, trembling, and sorrowful, caged within the attic walls. Yet, as days passed, Zola noticed something that unsettled her deeply. Amara's posture no longer slumped in despair. Her eyes sparkled with quiet determination, her face often lifted as if listening to secrets that Zola could not hear. The girl hummed softly, her voice weaving through the house like a hidden song, and sometimes even from the lower rooms faint silver glimmers seemed to flicker up toward the roof. A chill of suspicion crept into Zola's heart. How could Amara find peace, even a trace of joy, when confined and alone? One evening, driven by both jealousy and curiosity, Zola tiptoed toward the attic. Her footsteps were careful but firm, each creak of the stairs betraying her impatience. She reached the door and spoke in a voice that was more command than question, "Amara, what is it that comforts you up here? Show me." The attic remained still, bathed in the silver glow of the moonlight filtering through the small roof opening. Shadows stretched and twisted across the dusty floor, moving with a life that seemed subtly defiant, almost as if they were shielding the girl from Zola's intrusion. Amara, sensing her stepmother's presence, ducked behind a stack of old trunks, letting the shadows and the shimmering moonlight cloak her from view. She smiled faintly to herself, enjoying the playful game, though her heart pounded with the thrill of being seen yet hidden. With careful movements, she stepped lightly across the floorboards, using the mirrored surfaces of broken glass and tarnished metal to divert Zola's gaze. Each reflection caught and fractured the silver light, creating fleeting images that danced and twirled, confusing her stepmother further. Zola's sharp eyes darted across the room, trying to make sense of the glimmers and the faint movement, but the attic seemed alive with shapes she could not touch or control. Frustration began to gnaw at her. Zola's breaths came in quick, shallow bursts, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached toward the space where Amara had been moments before. She could feel it, an unseen presence hovering in the moonlit corners, protective and almost defiant. Every instinct in her body whispered that this was no ordinary attic, no ordinary child. There was something in the way the shadows responded, in the way the silver light shifted and pulsed, that spoke of magic, or at least something beyond her comprehension. She stepped back, unease curling through her chest like a vine, twisting tight and refusing to let go. Finally, Zola turned sharply, leaving the attic with a huff of anger and confusion. Her mind raced with speculation, half fearful, half enraged. How could a mere child, trapped and alone, display such calm and courage? The moonlight had revealed a strength she could not understand or suppress. She muttered to herself as she descended the stairs, her voice bitter, "It must be some hidden magic, some unseen force protecting her. I will not let it remain." Despite her plotting, she could not shake the sense of intrusion, the feeling that the attic was no longer hers to command, that the luminous presence surrounding Amara was something she could neither conquer nor explain. That night, Zola lay awake, haunted by silver shadows that seemed to flicker in the corners of her mind, whispering of a power beyond her control. Amara had begun to grow accustomed to the attic, no longer seeing it as a prison but as a quiet sanctuary where shadows and moonlight became her companions. One evening, as she carefully moved aside a pile of dust-covered trunks, she discovered something remarkable: old paintings and sketches tucked between broken boards and forgotten crates. They were remnants of her ancestors, the artwork of those who had lived and dreamed long before her time. Faded lines traced stories of village life, of celebrations and hardships, of rivers and forests teeming with life. The colors had dimmed over time, but the spirit of the creations lingered, whispering tales of courage, love, and resilience. Amara's eyes widened as she traced her fingers along the edges of these works, feeling a connection to the lives they represented, as if the attic had been waiting to reveal its secrets to her alone. Inspired, Amara began to create. She scratched shapes into the dust on the floor, drew simple sketches on torn scraps of paper, and even began to paint with crushed pigments she found in old containers hidden in the corners. The moonlight, streaming through the small roof opening, seemed to grow brighter each time her hands moved, as if encouraging her, guiding her strokes and outlining her sketches with a soft, ethereal glow. The silver light shifted and pulsed in tandem with her imagination, forming faint outlines of figures, animals, and flowers that danced alongside her creations. Sometimes the shapes would appear as protective spirits, standing guard over her fragile works, and at other times they took the forms of friends or companions, listening to the stories she whispered to them as she drew. Night after night, Amara's creativity flourished. Her imagination, once confined to her thoughts, spilled out into the attic, filling it with life and movement. She told stories aloud as she worked, of hope and bravery, of justice and kindness, weaving them into the shapes she created in dust and paper. The moonlight became more than mere illumination, it became an active participant in her art. Silvery outlines would shimmer along the edges of her drawings, emphasizing the curves of a figure, the delicate petals of a flower, or the flowing lines of a river. Amara felt as though the attic was alive, listening and responding to her voice, her heart, her very being. The interaction between her and the moonlight deepened with each passing night. Sometimes, the silvery figures would move as though animated, mimicking her motions, performing gentle dances in tandem with her storytelling. The moonlight seemed to applaud her triumphs and console her frustrations, always present, always patient. Amara realized that she was never truly alone. Her creativity had become a bridge between herself and the luminous presence, a channel through which her imagination could soar. Even when she paused to rest, the faint outlines of glowing shapes lingered in the corners of the attic, silent companions reminding her that her spirit was not confined by walls or shadows. Through this nightly ritual, Amara's heart grew strong. She learned that even in isolation, art could breathe life into the darkest corners, that stories told and drawn with care could create worlds as vivid as reality itself. The attic became more than a room, it became a sanctuary of courage and imagination, where every stroke of her hand, every whisper of her voice, was cherished by the moonlight. And in the gentle glow of silver shapes, Amara found a freedom that no lock or cruel stepmother could ever take away. One warm evening, as the village settled into the quiet lull of dusk, a young boy named Tay wandered near the edge of Amara's home. He was curious by nature, always attentive to the small wonders of life, and had long admired the girl from afar, though he had never dared to speak with her. That night, as he walked past the attic window, he paused, his ears catching the soft, lilting sound of a voice singing, a melody so delicate and enchanting that it seemed to carry the very silver glow of the moon itself. His eyes widened as he noticed flickers of silvery light moving inside, casting dancing shadows across the walls that made the old attic seem alive. Something extraordinary was happening beyond that window, something that called to his imagination and stirred his heart with wonder. Tay returned night after night, watching quietly from the shadows. He did not want to frighten the mysterious presence, yet he longed to offer a small gesture of kindness. He began leaving tiny gifts at the edge of the yard, just beneath the attic window, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, a bundle of fresh flowers, pencils and scraps of paper he hoped might bring delight. Each morning, he returned to find his offerings untouched, yet the silver light from the attic shone just a little brighter, as if acknowledging his care. He never saw Amara directly, never heard her speak his name, but a subtle connection began to form, threaded between his small acts and the magic that seemed to pulse within the attic. Inside, Amara noticed the small gifts with surprise and joy. She had thought herself completely alone, her companions only the shadows and the glowing moonlight, yet here was a reminder that kindness could reach her even from beyond the walls. She used the pencils to sketch more intricate patterns in the dust, to add new stories and figures to her nightly creations. The bread and flowers became symbols of hope, nourishing not only her body but her spirit, fueling the bond she had with the moonlight. With each act of generosity from Tay, the luminous presence seemed to respond with greater vibrancy, outlining animals, stars and protective spirits in richer, more intricate detail, guiding her hands and her imagination in ways that felt almost alive. The boy, meanwhile, could sense the magic but could not comprehend it fully. He noticed how the silver shapes moved with purpose, how the faint glow seemed to dance and interact with unseen hands, and he realized that this was no ordinary attic, no ordinary girl. Something wondrous lived in that small space, something that blended reality and imagination into a luminous world all its own. He felt privileged to witness it even from afar, and his small gestures became an unspoken dialogue, a way of participating in the magic without intruding. As nights passed, Amara's confidence grew. She sang more freely, drew more boldly, and shared more of her heart with the glowing figures and shadows. The attic transformed further into a place of warmth, imagination and life, a sanctuary strengthened not only by moonlight but by the invisible thread of care from a friend she had never seen. And though Tay never fully understood the nature of the magic, he felt its presence in every flicker of silver light, knowing that the attic held a story greater than he could yet imagine. A story of resilience, companionship, and the extraordinary ways kindness can ripple through even the darkest of places. Discovering that even in shadow, her light, and her stories, would endure. Night after night, the attic began to change. Once it had been a place of confinement, a dark and lonely chamber filled with dust and forgotten objects, but now it thrummed with life and possibility. The moonlight, spilling in through the small roof opening, seemed to stretch its silver fingers into every corner, illuminating the trunks, scattered papers, and worn floorboards with a gentle, protective glow. Shadows danced along the walls in playful arcs, tracing the curves of Amara's small figures and swirling around the outlines of her sketches in a rhythm that felt alive. Each night, the room grew warmer in spirit, the air humming faintly with the magic of imagination, as though the attic itself had awakened, eager to bear witness to the girl's creativity. Amara moved among the glowing shapes with a newfound confidence, her heart no longer weighed down by fear. She laid out her sketches on the floor, arranging them in sequences that told stories of the village beyond the attic walls, of children playing in the river, elders tending their gardens, and animals roaming the fields. With the moonlight as her companion, the drawings shimmered faintly, as if the silver glow breathed life into every line and curve. The attic became a gallery of her thoughts, hopes, and dreams, a space where imagination transcended confinement. Even the shadows, once heavy with the weight of solitude, now seemed playful and encouraging, curling gently around her creations as though protecting and celebrating them. Encouraged by the luminous presence, Amara began to write. On scraps of paper, she poured her thoughts, crafting stories of courage, kindness, and the intricate lives of the villagers she could only observe from afar. She wrote of imagined adventures, of friendships she longed for, and of dreams that soared beyond the roof that imprisoned her body. The moonlight responded to her words, tracing gentle outlines of animals, flowers, and stars across the pages, guiding her hand and inspiring her imagination to flow freely. With every story she penned, the attic's walls seemed to widen, as if space itself was bending to accommodate the life she was creating. Fear, once a constant companion, began to fade. The weight of isolation lifted as the moon's gentle presence taught her lessons in patience, courage, and hope. She discovered that even in the smallest gestures, tracing a bird in dust, shaping a river in silver light, writing a tale of bravery, she could nurture a sense of freedom and strength. The attic, no longer a prison, had become a sanctuary, a place where her mind could roam, where her heart could expand, and where the world's limitations could not confine her spirit. In the quiet hours, Amara would pause, listening to the soft hum of the night and the whisper of the silver glow, feeling a profound sense of companionship. She realized that the moonlight was more than illumination. It was a friend, a teacher, and a witness to her resilience. The attic had transformed, and with it, Amara herself. She had discovered that even in a place meant to suppress her, creativity, courage, and hope could flourish, filling the shadows with life and leaving a luminous trail that no darkness could ever erase. One late night, as the village lay in quiet slumber, Amara's father, Oba, stirred from his rest. He had been restless for weeks, hearing whispers of strange silver glimmers coming from the attic, faint melodies carried on the wind, and rumors that his daughter seemed somehow changed, calm, radiant, and unusually spirited despite her confinement. Drawn by curiosity and a growing sense of unease, he quietly climbed the narrow staircase, careful not to alert Zola below. When he reached the attic door, a warm silver glow spilled out through the cracks, painting the walls and floor with delicate patterns that seemed alive. Pushing the door open, Oba's eyes widened in astonishment. There, amidst scattered sketches, torn scraps of paper, and delicate shapes drawn in dust, sat Amara, bathed in the soft luminescence of the moonlight. The silvery glow seemed to embrace her, outlining her small figure and illuminating the whimsical forms of birds, flowers, and animals that shimmered on the floor. Her eyes, bright and fearless, lifted to meet his, and in that moment, the magnitude of what she had endured struck him fully. He saw not only the beauty and courage of his daughter but also the evidence of the days and nights she had spent isolated, finding strength and creativity in a world of shadows. Amara rose slowly, her voice calm yet trembling with emotion. "Father," she began, "I have to tell you everything. I cannot stay silent any longer." She guided him to the center of the attic, pointing to her sketches and the glowing figures that danced in the moonlight. She spoke of Zola, the cruelty and envy that had led her stepmother to confine her in this attic, and the ways in which the shadows and silence had become her companions. Her voice grew firmer as she described how the moonlight had comforted her, forming shapes and patterns that spoke to her heart, giving her courage and hope when all else seemed lost. Oba listened, stunned and silent, his heart twisting with shame. He had been distracted, absorbed in work and village matters, blind to the suffering of his own child. He had allowed Zola's envy to go unchecked, thinking it minor, thinking his presence or authority sufficient to protect her. Now he realized how deeply wrong he had been. The glowing art surrounding Amara, the vibrant shapes that pulsed with life, and the calm bravery in her eyes revealed the resilience that had grown in his absence. A resilience born of love for the moon, of imagination, and of courage that he had failed to nurture. He knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his own. "Amara," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "I see now. I have been blind. I'm so sorry. You should never have endured this alone." Tears pooled in his eyes as he realized how much he had failed her, and yet how strong she had become in spite of it. Amara, feeling the warmth and protection of both the moonlight and her father's presence, allowed herself to lean slightly against him, a mixture of relief and pride glowing in her heart. That night, Oba began to consider how to confront Zola, cautiously at first, knowing he had to protect Amara while also restoring balance in their home. He would not allow the cruelty and confinement to continue, nor would he deny the extraordinary presence that had nurtured his daughter. For the first time in weeks he felt both fear and hope, fear of the stepmother's wrath, hope in the luminous spirit that had sustained Amara, and hope in the courage of the daughter he now truly understood. Together, father and daughter stood beneath the silver moonlight, surrounded by glowing art and shapes of imagination, sharing a silent promise that no darkness could ever overshadow her brilliance again. Zola had grown restless. From below, she watched the attic night after night, noting with increasing frustration the changes in her stepdaughter. Amara no longer appeared timid or subdued. Her presence seemed to glow with a quiet confidence that Zola could neither understand nor control. Rumors of strange silver shimmers from the attic had reached her ears, whispers from the servants and neighbors about lights that moved as if alive. The sight and the tales fanned the flames of her envy and anger. Determined to regain dominance and crush the girl's burgeoning strength, Zola steeled herself for confrontation, promising herself that the attic's magic, or whatever she imagined it to be, would be destroyed. One evening she crept up the narrow staircase, her footsteps deliberate and filled with rage. Her eyes gleamed as they swept across the room, taking in the scattered sketches, the dust drawings, the faintly glowing shapes dancing in the silver moonlight. Each delicate line, each whimsical figure, seemed to mock her, a tangible proof of Amara's growing courage and independence. With a cry of fury, Zola lunged at the papers and trinkets, shattering a small wooden box and scattering torn drawings across the floor. She overturned trunks, sending a cloud of dust swirling through the attic like smoke, and snapped pencils and brushes in two, convinced that if she destroyed these objects, the girl's spirit would falter. But the attic had changed. The moonlight, streaming in from the roof, struck the shards of broken glass from the shattered box and the scattered surfaces of mirrors and frames, reflecting and multiplying into a soft, protective glow. The silver shimmer wrapped around the scattered papers, tracing the edges of torn sketches and illuminating the shapes she had drawn in the dust. It seemed as though the moonlight itself had become a shield, preserving not the physical objects, but the essence of Amara's creations. The luminous forms of animals, flowers, and dancing figures that had accompanied her work shimmered brighter, weaving around the ruined objects, restoring what Zola had attempted to destroy. Amara, crouched behind a trunk and hidden from sight, watched in awe and gratitude as the silver glow protected her art. She felt a surge of courage ripple through her body, and in that moment the bond she shared with the moonlight deepened. Every act of cruelty hurled at her only seemed to strengthen this connection, as if the moonlight recognized her spirit's resilience and responded by making it brighter. The shadows of the attic, once heavy with fear and isolation, now seemed alive with a protective energy, dancing around her sketches and flowing along the walls in silent celebration of her perseverance. Zola, meanwhile, fumed in confusion. The broken papers seemed untouched in their essence, glowing faintly with silver light, and the attic itself appeared to resist her attempts at destruction. Frustration boiled into helplessness as she realized that she could not reach the force that had begun to guard Amara. Each gesture of wrath only illuminated the girl's growing strength. Each smashed object reflected light that amplified the luminous presence, turning the girl's vulnerability into resilience. By the time Zola stormed back down the staircase, her anger exhausted but unresolved, Amara sat amidst her creations, surrounded by a soft, protective glow. Her sketches, her dust drawings, and her small stories had survived intact, more alive than ever. She had learned a vital lesson. Cruelty could not diminish the light of imagination, nor could fear destroy the bond forged between a girl and the moon. Each night in the attic fortified her spirit, her courage, and her creativity, proving that no force, however violent or envious, could truly break her. The night of Amara's release arrived quietly, yet with an air of wonder that seemed almost predestined. The village was still, the wind hushed as if it too were waiting, and the silver glow of the full moon spilled generously through the small attic roof. For the first time the light did not simply filter in, it poured, flooding every corner, bouncing off the dusty floorboards, the trunks and the walls, illuminating the sketches, the scraps of paper and the shapes etched in dust. Each creation, each story she had nurtured in isolation, shimmered with ethereal beauty, as though the moon itself were celebrating her resilience and courage. The glow traced her drawings, outlining animals mid-leap, rivers winding through imagined forests, and flowers unfolding with gentle grace. It was as if the moonlight recognized the spirit and heart poured into every work, and in return, imbued it with a vitality that no darkness could ever diminish. Amara stood in the center of the attic, her small hands brushing across a glowing sketch of a bird in flight. The light pulsed softly at her touch, as though acknowledging her presence and her perseverance. She felt a profound warmth seep into her bones, a combination of relief, pride, and something more, a deep understanding of the resilience she had cultivated in solitude. The moonlight seemed to speak without words, teaching her courage that went beyond mere survival, wisdom that flowed from observation and reflection, and a quiet strength that grew from enduring hardship with dignity. Her eyes lifted to the opening in the roof, where the silvery glow seemed almost tangible, like a protective hand resting upon her shoulder. Her father, standing just behind her, observed the scene in awe. Oba had helped her unlock the attic door that had imprisoned her, but now he realized that the true release had come long before the physical act. Amara's spirit, nurtured by moonlight and imagination, had grown free long ago. The luminous shapes of her drawings seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, reflecting not only her creativity but the inner strength she had forged in the quiet nights of confinement. He could see the grace and wisdom in her movements, the thoughtful patience in her gaze, and a serenity that even the cruelest shadow of Zola could not extinguish. Word of the moonlit attic spread quietly among the villagers. Those who walked past at night noticed the walls, once dark and oppressive, now shimmered faintly under the silver sky. Even when the moon moved across the heavens, the subtle glow lingered, as if the attic itself had become a sacred space, claimed by the luminous presence that had kept Amara company. It was a place of reverence, a testament to endurance, imagination, and the transformative power of gentle companionship in times of hardship. As Amara stepped down from the attic that night, she carried not only her creations but a profound sense of empowerment. Each sketch, each story, each flickering outline had left an indelible mark on her soul, a reminder that even when confined, creativity and hope could flourish. The moonlight had given her more than comfort. It had bestowed courage, wisdom, and the understanding that resilience was a treasure of the heart, one that could illuminate the darkest spaces and carry her into a life filled with possibility. From that night forward, the attic was no longer a place of imprisonment but a sanctuary of light, imagination, and sacred memory, a legacy of the bond between a girl and the moon that would endure in silver glow for years to come. The morning after her release, Amara stepped out of the attic with a quiet grace that belied the years of solitude she had endured. The silver traces of moonlight still lingered faintly in her hair and on the edges of her clothing, as if the night itself had blessed her passage into the day. Her eyes, bright and steady, reflected not just relief but a profound wisdom, the wisdom of someone who had faced darkness, embraced it, and transformed it into strength. With each step she took, the village seemed to notice the difference. Children paused in their play, elders tilted their heads, sensing the calm power that radiated from her. Amara had become more than a survivor. She had become a quiet force of inspiration, a living testament to resilience, courage, and creativity. She began to wander through the village, greeting the curious eyes that followed her, and sharing her story in small, gentle ways. Children, once timid or distracted, were drawn to her presence. She told them tales of the attic, of the glowing moonlight that had guided her, and of the power of imagination even in confinement. She demonstrated how to draw in the dust, to paint with pigments gathered from flowers and soil, and how to weave stories into every stroke and sketch. With patience and warmth, she showed them that fear could be transformed into creativity, that loneliness could become a source of strength, and that even in the darkest spaces, light could find a way to shine. Meanwhile, Zola's influence waned rapidly. The villagers, once wary of the stepmother's jealous authority, now saw her cruelty for what it was. Stripped of power and respect, Zola withdrew, her presence fading into shame and quiet resentment. Attempts to assert control over the household or the village were met with polite but firm resistance, and the stepmother's shadow over Amara's life diminished until it was no longer feared, only remembered as a cautionary tale. In her absence, the village embraced the lessons Amara embodied: compassion, courage, and the nurturing of creativity in all who were willing to learn. Amara's days were now filled with teaching, guiding children in art, storytelling, and the careful observation of the world around them. She encouraged them to explore their imagination fully, to draw inspiration from nature, the people in their lives, and even the quiet spaces that often went unnoticed. Each child she taught carried a piece of her luminous spirit, their own sketches glowing under the sun and the moon, just as her attic had once glowed under silver light. Through these acts, she began to weave a network of creativity and resilience that extended beyond her own experience, ensuring that her lessons would persist in the hearts of the next generation. Yet even as she inspired others, Amara never forgot the attic and the moonlight that had sustained her. She visited the space often, sharing her gratitude silently with the silver glow that had guided her. The attic remained a sacred place, a testament to endurance, imagination, and the bond between a girl and the night's luminous companion. And so, Amara's new dawn was more than a return to freedom. It was the beginning of a legacy, one in which courage, art, and light could flourish, teaching an entire village that even the smallest spark of hope could illuminate the darkest confinement. Years passed, and the story of Amara, the girl once locked in the attic, spread beyond the boundaries of her village. Travelers spoke of a remarkable child who had faced cruelty and isolation with unyielding courage, a girl whose spirit had been nurtured by moonlight and imagination. Children listened with wide eyes to tales of how she had transformed a place meant for punishment into a sanctuary of art and hope. Artists, moved by the story, whispered her name as they worked, leaving small offerings, silver dust sprinkled across sketches, scraps of paper filled with drawings, tiny tokens of respect, at the foot of the attic stairs or near the window where the moonlight had once poured in. These gestures were not just homage. They were acknowledgement that her courage had inspired generations to trust in the power of creativity and the resilience of the human spirit. The attic itself had become a place of quiet reverence. Its walls, once dark and oppressive, now shimmered faintly under the night sky, holding the memory of every brushstroke, every sketch in dust, and every whispered story that Amara had created. On full moon nights, villagers claimed that the silver glow returned, soft and serene, illuminating the corners as though the moon itself had claimed the room as sacred. Shadows moved in gentle arcs across the floor, and faint outlines of animals, flowers, and figures, shapes that Amara had once drawn, seemed to dance in the silver light. Those who gazed carefully could almost feel her presence, a comforting reminder that imagination and hope had survived even the harshest confinement. Artists who visited the village often felt a peculiar energy upon entering the attic. They would find themselves inspired in unexpected ways, their hands guided by an invisible presence, creating sketches and paintings infused with subtle silver accents that seemed to shimmer in the light. Some claimed they could hear faint whispers, melodies carried on the wind, the same gentle music that had once soothed Amara's loneliness. Travelers shared tales of the attic's magic, of the girl and the moon that had nurtured her spirit. Over time, the legend grew not merely as a story of suffering and endurance, but as a celebration of the way creativity can flourish under even the darkest of circumstances. Children in the village took particular joy in the story. They would sneak to the attic on clear nights, hoping to catch a glimpse of the soft glow or the faint silhouettes of the figures she had drawn long ago. Parents encouraged their curiosity, teaching them that Amara's courage and the moon's guidance were lessons in resilience, patience, and the importance of nurturing one's gifts. Even long after Amara herself had grown, married, or moved beyond the village, her presence lingered in these stories, in the silver dust left on sketches, and in the playful, glowing outlines that sometimes appeared on full moon nights. The moon became a symbol as well, not only of comfort and companionship but of protection and guidance. Villagers taught that even when human kindness falters, or when cruelty seems overwhelming, there is a quiet force that can support, nurture, and preserve the light within. Amara's story reminded everyone that confinement and hardship cannot truly destroy a spirit that chooses hope, that creativity can bloom even in shadows, and that a single luminous presence, real or imagined, can transform fear into courage and isolation into sanctuary. Generations later, the attic remained a place of wonder. Travelers, artists, and curious children continued to speak of the girl who had been kept away but never broken, of the moonlight that had come nightly to keep her company, and of the glowing art that had endured long after her release. Each silvered outline on the floor, each faint shimmer on the walls, served as a testament. Even in confinement, creativity and hope can flourish, lighting a path for those who come after. And under the full moon, the village remembered that a single spark of courage, nurtured with care and imagination, could illuminate the darkest corners of life, leaving a legacy that would endure for centuries.